politically correct position, which is that women can become men and men can become women, and we have to force children to embrace this idea by putting boys in girls' bathrooms. And then there's the politically incorrect position called science. Men are men, women are women, and you don't get to cross over by chopping off a few body parts or sewing a few of them on. And President Obama is pushing this particular viewpoint, and it really is important. I want to stop for a second and point this out. It is important. The transgender bathroom issue is important, not because of bathrooms, but because of transgenderism as a social construct, transgenderism as a concept, and the unmitigated attempts of the left to target your children in order to push their leftist agenda. So President Obama, always for the left, it has to be done through schools and through children. They always have to push the left agenda through children. It's always for the good of the kids. Of course, all that means is screwing with kids' heads, but it's all for the good of the kiddies. Now, the truth is that they say it's to protect transgender kids from bullying. First of all, there are 2 transgender kids in the United States. Second of all, even if you want to protect transgender kids from bullying, there's a very simple way to do that. Have teachers who don't tolerate bullying. Wasn't that easy? Look at that. That's amazing. You don't need to teach kids that heterosexuality and homosexuality are on moral par in order to stop bullying, and you don't need to teach them the idiocy that men can become women and women men in order to stop bullying. That's silly, but this is what the left says. Schools are the bullies here, okay? Barack Obama is the bully. He's saying he has to stop bullying. He has to make everybody feel comfortable. How about the 99.999% of the population in these school bathrooms who feels uncomfortable when somebody of the opposite sex walks in and they're unclad? How about the little girls who don't feel comfortable with a boy peeing next to them in the bathroom? Those people have to be made to feel like bigots and feel uncomfortable. So the bullying thing really goes both ways, but there's a lot less, but let's put it this way. The bullying of transgender kids is a lot less of an issue for our government and our society than the federal government bullying everyone in the United States into embracing the idea that an 18-year-old man walking into a 15-year-old girl's locker room is suddenly okay, which is what he's talking about. There's also something else that's I think worthy of examination here, and that is that this isn't really about protection of kids in any real way. What this really is about is indoctrination and perversion of children. That's really what this is about. The left always starts with kids. Notice, Obama didn't mandate this transgender bathroom nonsense. He didn't mandate this for the U.S. military. He didn't mandate it for federal government facilities. He mandated it for public schools. He mandated it for kids. Why? Well, supposedly it's because the left believes that sexual identity is unchanging and rigid, and sex itself, gender itself, is malleable. Therefore, if you teach kids that they get to choose your sex, since it's malleable, it's a social construct anyway, you're not doing them any harm. You tell a 5-year-old girl to choose whether she's a girl or a boy, you're not harming her in any way, because that's all just social construct nonsense. Similarly, if you tell a 5-year-old girl that lesbianism is fine, she's not going to be more likely to try out lesbianism because she's already set in her ways. It's all biological, right? It's ingrained right there in the biology. Of course, precisely the reverse is true. You tell a 5-year-old girl she can be a girl or a boy, you're going to screw with her head. You tell a 5-year-old girl that anybody she chooses to have sex with when she's not even pubescent yet, right? That anybody who she will eventually choose to have sex with is perfectly morally hunky-dory, and you think this isn't going to change behavior? Nonsense. Nonsense. Particularly because science tends to show that sexuality is remarkably fluid. Sexual identity certainly is remarkably fluid. There's a reason that 2 generations ago, there's a poll in Britain recently, it showed for people who were born 2 generations ago, 95% say they're straight. Of people who were born in our generation, millennials, something like only 43% say they are binary straight. Okay, 43%. Don't tell me that's genetics, gang. That's society pushing a perception of what sexual identity should be. Leftists aren't dumb. They know all of this. Their whole case is that parents should not be allowed to raise their children with traditional morality and traditional sex roles because that's bad. And that's bad because the government can't control the kids then. It's bad because traditional sex roles, the idea of man-woman marriage, creation of a family, it's an obstacle to government control of your child. And so what they do is they use the bullying agenda in order to come in and take control of your children by saying that if we leave it to you to educate your own kid, then your kid will end up being a bully and targeting other kids, which of course is absolute
So
nonsense.
I'll tell you a story. I don't know how many of you have seen this on CNN Headline News. I had exactly this debate on Dr. Drew's show a few months ago. It was about 3 months ago. And it was I think, the #1 story on Facebook and Twitter for about 3 days. Because this is why they don't have me on CNN that often. They were talking about Caitlyn Jenner. And the question of the day was why Caitlyn Jenner should or should not receive the ESPN Courage Award, because, as we all know, the courage to have a boob job, make millions of dollars off of it, have a mental illness that's exploited by television cameras is exactly the same as the courage it took for men to get off boats at the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. I mean, courage is courage, guys. So they had me on this. They had me on this show, and they decided that they were going to seat me directly next to a transgender woman, meaning a man who is delusional and thinks he's a woman. And so I'm sitting next to this dude whose name is Zoe Tur. His former name is Bob Tur, and he's sitting next to me, and this topic comes up. And what I said, they were going around discussing whether or not Caitlyn Jenner was courageous or not courageous. And finally, I just said, I don't understand why we're all humoring mass delusion. Why is the public humoring a delusion? It's not kind to the mentally ill. It's terrible for the mentally ill. As somebody whose grandfather was schizophrenic, it would have been really, really quite terrible if the entire society had said to him, you know what, Nate, you're totally right. The radio is talking to you. Right? It wouldn't have been beneficial to him. It was much more beneficial to him that he was institutionalized, given lithium, and then healed, basically, and was able to live a decent life. The idea that transgender surgery accomplishes anything for people who are quote-unquote transgender is nonsense. The suicide rates are precisely the same before and after the surgery, and they are both in excess of 40%, which is unbelievably high. The idea that society is responsible for transgender suicide is absolute garbage. It is not true. Okay, the fact is that even they've done polls of this. There was a poll from the Anderson School at UCLA, and they found that even transgender people who say they're not questioned about being transgendered, they have exactly the same rate of suicidality, meaning that this is a mental illness, because that rate of suicidality is so far beyond anything that has ever been experienced in any population of humans ever. Seriously, the only comparable rate of suicide to the transgender community today is Jews living under Nazi German rule. That is the only time in human history that there has been that rate of suicide. So I promise you, transgenders are not being treated like Jews under Nazi German rule, so it clearly is not societal impact that is making people suicidal. What's making people suicidal is that this is a mental illness, and it is barbaric to suggest that a man can become a woman and a woman can become a man with a snip of the knife. It's horrifying, and it is mutilation, and it is brutal. And the people who are pushing this have no sympathy for the people who are actually suffering from it. They're forwarding mental illness. They're forwarding mental illness to kids because they want to teach this to children now. And this is one where you're on. I mean, these people. It is unbelievable to me that the left suggests that we're the party of anti-science. Okay, they are the party of vaccines are bad and men can magically become women through some magic man-to-woman machine, right? It's such utter nonsense. Every cell of Caitlyn Jenner's body has a Y chromosome, except ironically for his sperm cells, right? So the idea that these are women is just it's utter tripe. And I have to say I am enjoying a little bit how the transgender movement is destroying feminism. That's kind of fun. Because the feminists have always argued that men and women are inherently different, right? Men and women are and women have a beautiful, unique thing to bring to the world. And then, of course, they say a bunch of other crap. But that's the part what they say is true. And now they're saying, but transgenderism says that men and women are exactly the same and can randomly shift. It's weird to hear Hillary Clinton, for example, say, Caitlyn Jenner is a beautiful, lovely woman, and then in the same sentence say, and we need a woman president. It's like, well, that's kind of weird. Why? If men and women are exactly the same, then why do we need a woman president? Right? Men and women are exactly the same. So Barack Obama, without any changes to himself, but if Obama really wanted to jack her in this election, he would do that. He'd come out 2 days before the election and he'd say, I'm the first woman president. Right? And change nothing about himself, right? Because transgenderism suggests you don't have to make physical changes, you don't have to change your dress, you don't have to change anything. Right? If you just decide one day that if Charles Bronson one day decided to saunter on in, take off his gun belt, and mosey on in and sashay on in to the ladies' restroom for a little sitsy on the toilet, then he would be a woman. This is the way that this is. What I love about this particular debate is I think enough Americans are not insane that they will buy the argument that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, considering they have known this since they were small children. My daughter's 21 months old, and she can tell the difference between boys. The Democrats continue to harp about science, and their new favorite science people are, obviously, they love Caitlyn Jenner because Caitlyn Jenner is an emissary for science, which is silly. But the other person who's the emissary for science is Bill Nye the Science Guy, which just demonstrates, the left, which claims that it's just terrible, we have a celebrity president. The person that they are trotting out as their lead spokesperson for science is a guy with a mechanical engineering degree from Cornell, right, in like 1979,
That guy is the scientist who they think is the expert on all things scientific, and that means that Bill Nye is pushing his version of science. What does his version of science look like? Well, again, he has this idiotic show on Netflix called Bill Nye Saves the World, and as I said yesterday, spoiler alert, he doesn't. Here is a segment from that horrible show in which he says that 3-year-olds should be able to choose their own gender.
By 3 or 4, most kids identify with a gender, and it doesn't always match the sex they were assigned at birth. And a person's gender identity may change over their lifetime. And culture is getting us new ways to express all of this. How you dress, how you act and talk, how you present yourself to the world. It should be up to you. Sure, this might make things confusing for those who insist everyone pick an M or an F. But people, we have to listen to the science. And the science says we're all on a spectrum.
Okay, science does not say you're on a spectrum of sex. When they say gender, see, this is what the left likes to do, and it's really, really stupid, okay? The left says that gender is a social construct, and what they mean by that is femininity and masculinity are a social construct. Here is the truth about that. There are certain aspects of masculinity that are certainly not a social construct. Higher levels of testosterone, average higher levels of violence by males than females. That is not a social construct. That is a biological reality, okay? So that is not an aspect of gender. That's more an aspect of sex. The left likes to conflate sex and gender. So they separate these two things. They say sex is your biology, and then they say that gender is a social construct that says you need to be masculine or you need to be feminine. Now, not a lot of people that I know actually care whether you act masculine or whether you act feminine, per se. But that's not choosing a gender, okay? That's just whether you act masculine or feminine. Then what the left does is they say your masculinity or femininity, we can now read back into your sex. So in other words, if you are a feminine man, right? If you're a man who's biologically male and you act feminine, maybe you're a woman. Okay, this is stupid and ascientific. There's no evidence for it at all. It is also evil to suggest that a 3-year-old knows that they're going to choose a gender that is opposite of the one that they have. Okay, 3-year-olds don't know anything. I know because I have a 3-year-old. 3-year-olds do not know anything. It is your job as an adult to teach them about things that are complex and make the complex simple in ways that they can understand. And if when they hit 15, they're still having problems, then we can have a conversation about this. But this idea that 3-year-olds are capable of choosing their gender is asinine. Anyone who has a 3-year-old will tell you this. And it is cruel to a 3-year-old to say to the 3-year-old that you're going to be allowed to define your own essence of the world and you're going to be allowed to override your own biology. A 3-year-old is not capable of doing that. And there is no science to support this. What he has is anecdotal evidence saying that people who are 20 say, when I was 3, I felt like a girl in a boy's body. Okay, that is not scientific evidence that there is some brain test we can run that determines you are actually a girl in a boy's body. There's no scientific evidence to that effect. The idea that he is saying this is purely anti-scientific. But again, it's a political agenda masquerading as science. I'm old enough to remember when Bill Nye was on my television explaining that sex was a function of chromosomes. And that was actual science. And now he's saying sex is a function of what's ever in your head, and it can change over time. Your gender can change over time. And again, the left likes to play this word game where they say, well, we don't mean your sex can change over time. We mean your gender can change over time. And they say, well, what do you mean by that? And they say, well, it means you can be a woman. Okay, now you're talking about sex again. That's not the same thing. If you're going to separate out the two terms, you have to be very specific in how you use gender. If you mean that there can be a person who changes their behavior over time, bucking particular stereotypes about feminine and masculine, that I'm sure is true because people do it every day. What is not true is that you can change your sex, and the left conflates the two after separating them out. They like to pretend that everything that is feminine is not linked to sex, and then they pretend that if you are masculine as a girl, that means that you must be actually secretly a man. Or you can choose to be a man, which is just as scientifically stupid. 3-year-olds should not choose their own gender. Parents who do this to their child are doing something evil to their children. Your goal in life is not to confuse your children. Your goal in life is to simplify things for your children. Again, 3-year-olds are not capable of making these types of decisions, and damning a child to a lifetime of suffering is just cruel. The studies show that 8 in 10 kids who at any point suffer from any sort of gender identity issues grow out of that by the time they hit their teenage years. And what he is saying is that we should tell all kids, 100 out of 100 kids, we should tell them all they can pick their sex. So now you're telling a bunch of 3-year-olds, who are by nature dumb, that they can pick their sex. Okay, they can't. And it is a lie. And then beyond that lie, you're now confusing 100 3-year-olds. Let's take it statistically. Let's even pretend that Bill Nye was right. Okay, let's pretend that it's biologically decided that you're a boy in a girl's body or some such nonsense, which is just not true. And again, there's no scientific evidence to suggest that you're a boy in a girl's body. In fact, even the people who say that brain scans show differences between transgender people and people who are not transgender, even those say that it is a transgender brain, but it does not mean that you have a woman's brain in a man's body. It just means that you have differences from the traditional male brain. Even that is really really scanty evidence, but that's the furthest that good scientists will go. And to say anything different is just not scientific. But let's take this statistically and assume that the left is even correct. Okay, so the transgender suicide rate over the course of a lifetime is 40%. 40%. Less than 1 person per 100 is going to be transgender in the United States. It's very, very rare, okay? And it's getting more common now because it's become kind of trendy, and because if you're a teenager and you want attention, then you can do it. Or if you have doubts, then we have decided that we're going to promulgate those doubts into reality. So even if you're not just trying to do it for some nefarious